Good morning, everyone. Today I want to talk to you about something that many people fear, avoid, or misunderstand. Being alone. We often associate solitude with loneliness, rejection, or isolation. But what if I told you that God sometimes wants you to be alone, not to punish you, but to prepare you? Inspired by the teachings of Joyce Meyer, I want to share with you a powerful truth. There is purpose in your solitude. There are moments in life when God pulls us away from the noise, the people, the distractions, not to leave us empty, but to fill us with His presence, His strength, and His direction. Let's explore together why your alone season may be your most transformational season, because sometimes the only way God can speak clearly is when everything else is quiet. Solitude is God's invitation for spiritual growth and deeper intimacy with Him. Often in life, we view being alone as something negative. We see it as a sign that we're not loved, not wanted, or that something is wrong with us. But in God's eyes, solitude is often not a punishment. It's a divine setup. It's in those moments when everything and everyone seems to fade away that God begins to work deeply within us. He uses those quiet times, those seasons of separation, to shape us, grow us, and reveal Himself more fully. Throughout the Bible, we see countless examples of God calling people into solitude before using them for great purposes. Moses was alone in the desert for 40 years before he was called to lead the Israelites. David was alone tending sheep before he became a king. Jesus Himself often withdrew from the crowds to be alone with the Father. In each of these stories, solitude wasn't a delay, it was preparation. It was in those lonely places that God developed character, strengthened faith, and gave clear direction. When we are constantly surrounded by people, noise, and responsibilities, it's easy to lose sight of who we are and what God is saying. Our identity can get tangled in other people's expectations, in our roles, or even in the busyness of doing good things. But when God brings us into a season of solitude, He is stripping away the distractions so that we can rediscover who we are in Him. He wants to remind us that our value doesn't come from what we do or who we're with. It comes from who He is and who we are in Him. Spiritual growth doesn't always happen in the spotlight. In fact, some of the most profound transformation takes place in the hidden, quiet moments with God. It's in solitude that we begin to face the parts of ourselves we've been avoiding. We become aware of our fears, our doubts, our insecurities, and more importantly, we begin to see how much we need God's grace and strength. Alone with God, we can be real. There's no need to perform, no need to impress, no need to pretend. In that sacred space, He meets us just as we are and begins to refine us into who He's calling us to be. Solitude also gives us the space to hear God's voice more clearly. The world is noisy, and it often drowns out the still, small voice of God. But in the quiet, when we are alone with Him, His voice becomes clearer. We start to receive revelation, guidance, and understanding that we may not have noticed in the busyness of daily life. It's not that God wasn't speaking before, it's that we finally slowed down enough to listen. God often uses solitude to reveal our true purpose. When we are surrounded by the opinions of others, it's easy to get confused about what we're really called to do. People mean well, but their voices can lead us off course. In solitude, we have the opportunity to tune into God's vision for our lives. He begins to clarify our gifts, our calling, and our next steps. Sometimes it's in those quiet moments that a new dream is born, a new direction is revealed, or a new strength is discovered. It's also in solitude that our faith is tested and strengthened. Without the comfort of others, we learn to rely solely on God. We stop looking to people to fill what only God can satisfy. And in that process, our faith becomes deeper, stronger, and more resilient. We learn to trust God not just for blessings, but in the waiting, in the silence, and even in the pain. Being alone with God also teaches us contentment. We begin to find joy not in circumstances or relationships, but in God's presence. We learn that He truly is enough. This kind of contentment can't be faked or forced. It grows out of time spent in His presence, away from all the things we think we need to be happy. Solitude isn't easy, and it's rarely comfortable, but it is powerful. It creates a sacred space for God to move in our hearts. It's in those quiet moments when no one else is around, when the phone stops ringing, when the world seems to pause, that God does His deepest work. He heals wounds, breaks chains, restores identity, and pours out fresh vision. He becomes not just someone we believe in, but someone we know personally. God doesn't waste anything, especially not seasons of solitude. Every moment alone with Him is a moment of transformation. While it may feel like isolation, it is often divine intimacy. In His presence, we find the strength, the healing, and the clarity we've been searching for. And when the time comes to step back into the world, we do so with a deeper sense of purpose, identity, and peace. Being alone positions you to hear God's voice without distractions. In the world we live in today, noise is constant. From the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed, there are sounds, notifications, voices, and demands all around us. We're surrounded by opinions, suggestions, entertainment, and responsibilities. In the midst of all this, it becomes incredibly hard to hear the still, small voice of God. We may want to hear from Him. We may even pray for direction. But we rarely get quiet enough to truly listen. God does not usually shout to get our attention. He speaks in a stillness that requires us to pause, to step away from the crowd, and to listen with intention. That's why being alone is so important. When we choose or are led into a season of solitude, it's not an accident. It's often God's way of creating a space where His voice can rise above the noise of the world. In the quiet, when we are no longer distracted by the busyness of life, our spiritual ears become more sensitive. We start to recognize God's leading more clearly, and we begin to hear things we didn't notice before. Many people in the Bible experience this firsthand. Think of Elijah, the prophet. After a dramatic confrontation on Mount Carmel, Elijah fled into the wilderness, feeling defeated and afraid. It was in that lonely cave, far from anyone else, that God spoke to him. Not in the wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in a gentle whisper. Elijah could only hear that whisper because everything else had gone silent. That story reminds us that sometimes we have to be alone to hear the gentle voice of God that comforts, corrects, and guides. In our daily lives, distractions come in many forms. They may be people who constantly demand our attention, technology that keeps us endlessly engaged, or even our own internal fears and doubts that speak louder than God's truth. When we intentionally step away from these distractions, when we embrace solitude rather than resist it, we create the space where God can speak and we can listen. This is not about cutting people off or isolating ourselves in an unhealthy way. It's about creating moments where God has our full attention. God wants to speak to you personally. He doesn't just want you to rely on sermons, books, or the opinions of others, although those can be helpful. He wants you to know His voice for yourself. That kind of intimate knowing only comes through time spent alone with Him. In those quiet moments, He can whisper truth into your heart. He can bring clarity to confusion, peace to anxiety, and conviction where change is needed. His voice brings life, but we have to be still enough to receive it. Hearing God's voice also builds our confidence in our relationship with Him. When we know what He sounds like, we're less likely to be swayed by other voices. We don't have to run around asking everyone for advice or approval. We become more grounded because we have heard directly from the source. This doesn't mean we stop seeking wise counsel, but it means we are no longer dependent on it to feel secure. God's voice becomes the anchor of our decision-making, our identity, and our direction. Sometimes God uses solitude to remove the voices that have been influencing us more than we realize. It's easy to be shaped by culture, social media, or even the well-meaning words of friends and family, but not all of those voices align with God's will. Being alone gives us a chance to step back and ask, what does God say, and not just what do others think? In that space, we can align ourselves more fully with His truth. In the quiet, we also begin to discern the difference between God's voice and our own thoughts. Sometimes we mistake fear for wisdom or anxiety for warning, but as we spend more time in stillness, we learn to recognize the tone, the peace, and the authority that come with God's voice. We start to notice that His voice calms rather than confuses, encourages rather than condemns, and challenges us in love rather than shaming us. That kind of discernment can only be developed through time and attention, both of which are most available in solitude. When God speaks in solitude, it often leads to transformation. One word from Him can shift our entire perspective. One moment of clarity can realign our priorities. One whisper of love can heal years of insecurity. But we have to be willing to enter the silence, to embrace the stillness, and to let go of the things that keep our minds and hearts constantly occupied. It's not always easy, and it often requires intentional effort, but the reward is worth it. Being alone isn't about emptiness. It's about being available. When we remove distractions and turn our attention fully toward God, we position ourselves to receive exactly what we need, exactly when we need it. His voice is always speaking. The question is, are we listening? And more importantly, are we quiet enough to hear Him when He does?